What's up, guys? Glad y'all came out for week 2 of our series, Scandalous Grace. We're going to actually be in the same chapter and same story that we were in last week, just looking at different characters this week. Mark chapter 5, if you have a Bible, I invite you to grab it. Go to Mark chapter 5. If you don't, the verses will be on the screens behind me. As you're turning there, every year for over the last, 6-7 years or so, or maybe even a couple more, I've been going to daddy-daughter dances with my kids. And so there's a picture of me and Cassie and Bridget just kind of cutting up together. We're on the dance floor there at their school, and just kind of in between, like I'll throw them in the air, catch them, and then kind of spin them around. And then other than that, all the dads are kind of in the room, and we're just kind of doing the, arms at 90, this is kind of where we're hanging out, just kind of watching them do their thing. Well, as I was there, about 15, 20 minutes into being at this daddy-daughter dance, I picked up my phone just to see what time it was, and I saw that Carrie, my wife, had called me. And so I go out and I call her, and she says, hey, I'm stuck. And I was like, what do you mean you're stuck? Like the car stalled out or something? And she goes, no. Like, I'm stuck in mud right now. And I was like, that's really interesting. We don't drive mud roads. Like, there's no dirt roads around where we live in the city here in Lubbock. And so, what do you mean you're stuck? And so it had just snowed. It just snowed like 2 days or something before that. And so there was like ice on both sides of the road. And she was taking some food to somebody who was sick, and she dropped it off. She said on her way back, she was so focused on the road that she missed her turn and thought, hey, I'll just find a turnaround somewhere. And where she found that turnaround just happened to be this dirt road where now was just completely just slushy mud. And she said that my car is in the ditch on the side where the groove had been dug by so many people trying to get out. And she wasn't even alone. And she just goes, hey, but I got some other guys from our small group coming to help us out. And she goes, oh, I'm going to call them right now. They're calling. Okay, see you later. And so she gets off the phone with me. And I was like, okay, wait a second. First of all, she just hung up on me, and she let me know that she called some other men from our small group to come out and help her. And I was like, so they're going to get out there and go, oh yeah, so where's Travis at? He must be like not available. And she would say, oh no, he was available. I just told him to stay, and he was like, okay. And so it's like, I was like, I'm not a deadbeat. I'm not going to do that. Not only that, but even more wounding to the ego is the fact that she thought that I would be so little help. That she was like, I'm just going to call you and let you know what's happening. I'm going to call some actual men that'll come in and be able to help me out. And I was like, no, we're getting in the car. Like, I got the girls in the car. I was like, we're going to go and we're going to see if we can help her. And so we get there, man. I'm wearing like a suit here, just like the picture. That's what I was wearing. I was wearing Cole Haan dress shoes. And I mean, we were just sinking down into the mud inches. And all of us lost our shoes. We could not keep our shoes on. Like, that's how much suction was happening from the mud. And I was like, this is not a good situation. So I get there and I'm like, you really thought that I couldn't do anything to help you? And so I'm there and I'm like trying to get out of the mud, and she was right. I couldn't do anything to help her. But we were there, man, and I was like, dude, we're stuck here, and the way forward, if you will, was clear as mud. See what I did there? Because we were stuck in mud. It's funny. High-level humor. Okay. And so we're there, and we're just desperately waiting for somebody to answer the call to come and help us. And some guys from our small group did. Not all heroes wear capes. And the reason why I start with that is because tonight what we're talking about is how we call out to God in faith when we're in these places where we're stuck. And sometimes we get stuck because we took a wrong turn somewhere, kind of like Carrie, but in life, we take a wrong turn in our lives when we find ourselves in a place that we didn't think that we would be, and we're spinning our wheels, and we're just, man, we cannot get out of this rut. And then sometimes, man, we find ourselves in places where we're stuck because, man, the world we live in is just a broken place. And there's suffering and sorrow, and there's hard things, and it has nothing to do with us causing any of it. We're just in a broken world. In all of that, we're going to see his grace meets us in that place and gives us faith. Specifically tonight, what we're going to see is that faith begins with the end of yourself, that faith is tested in the waiting, and that a little faith can do big things. And then finally, how the grace of Jesus breaks through the barrier to reach every single one of us. And we're going to see this unfold in Mark chapter 5. We'll read the first verses 21 through 24, and then we'll jump down to 35 because we spent our time last week in the verses that we're skipping over. Starting in verse 21, it says, "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live.' And Jesus went with him." And so Jesus goes with him. And then we see unfold what we spent our time looking at last week, that there's this woman who had this issue for 12 years, and she is like, all this crowd is around Jesus as he's gaining popularity as this miracle worker, and she gets this powerful miracle, yet Jairus is just sitting there waiting for him to come with him so he could have Jesus heal his daughter. He's in desperation, yet he's in this place where he is waiting. And then we get to verse 35. It says, "While Jesus was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, 'Your daughter is dead.' Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping," because he knew he was about to raise her to life. And it says they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking. For she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. As we look at this interaction between Jairus and Jesus and his daughter, the first point this evening is faith begins with the end of yourself. In verse 22, it says that Jairus comes and he falls at the feet of Jesus. Now, this is significant for a couple of reasons. So, Jesus at this point in time was gaining a lot of popularity. A lot of people were following him, but also Jesus had people that opposed him. And those people that opposed him specifically the most were the church leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and other religious leaders. And Jairus, we see he's the ruler of the synagogue. So, this is his circle of people. These are no doubt some of his really good friends. And so for him to go and to fall at the feet of Jesus in this way of desperation, especially with others in his circle that would have seen this, he would have been risking his reputation by bowing to Jesus. And the reason why this really matters is because, man, he wanted what Jesus offered more than he cared about his reputation. And when you're truly in a place of desperation for God, you want Jesus more than you care about anything else. Do you want Jesus and what he can give you more than what others think of you? Like, is Jesus worth your reputation? It's significant for him. For him, the answer was yes in this moment. And it's also significant because he had to admit that he could not do it. Like, he needed the hope that this healer could help him. He was at the end of himself. Like, there was nothing he could do to help his girl, but yet he humbles himself before Jesus going, "But I hear that you can. And would you come with me?" And he humbles himself before God. It's interesting. It's pain, actually, that brings Jairus to Jesus. Like, how fascinating. And man, I don't know if y'all caught this, but as people shared what brought them to getting baptized, like they shared that it was loss of someone in their family that led them to this low point that, man, he came to know Christ. That it was this place of emptiness for another person that shared, that it led her to realize that, man, that there's only one person who's going to give fulfillment where everything else has left her empty, and that was Jesus. But it was the pain of emptiness that led her to Jesus. Another person shared, man, I was actually diagnosed with cancer, and I, ordered this like faith starter kit thing, and a Bible came, and I started to read that, and I realized Jesus is what I have been needing the whole entire time. It's pain. For all those people that got baptized, it started with this ache that brought them to the one who satisfies. It's interesting that pain can bring us to Jesus. C.S. Lewis, he said it like this. He said, pain insists on being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. There's something about pain that brings us to the end of ourselves. We realize Jesus is the thing and the only thing that's going to work. And so what happens is we realize our need for Jesus. We reach out to him, right? We go to him, and Jairus does this. He says, Jesus, I've heard about you. Would you be willing to heal my little girl? Would you come with me? And he says, yes, but then he finds himself, and just like so many of us have, he finds himself in this waiting period. He finds himself in the waiting room, which brings us to the next point this evening. Faith is tested in the waiting. So Jairus is waiting while Jesus heals this woman. And all of us, man, like we know, it's a common human experience, this experience of waiting. For instance, so how many of you were actually at the game last night? Raise some hands. Okay. Man, I felt myself aging watching that game. I was so stressed. Anybody, I was just so stressed. I was walking back and forth. I was like looking and I'm watching. I tell Carrie, Carrie, I feel like I'm about to not be Christian anymore. I feel like I'm about to, I'm so stressed out right now. And Carrie was like, she actually goes, I'm actually a little concerned for you. Are you going to be okay? I'm like, I don't know. Are they going to win? And so, and man, we were just in this place where I don't know how it's going to pan out. Hey, got the dub. And hey, the W win column doesn't care what the score was. And so, but man, I didn't know how it was going to pan out. We don't know how it's going to turn out sometimes. Or go with another example, how many of you have been stuck in traffic and you need to use the restroom? And at first you're like, hey, it's all good. You're like, I can hold it. But then it goes bumper to bumper on you. And I'm telling you, at some point, you start getting the cold sweats. And I'm telling you, this is a moment that'll make an atheist start to pray to God. God, I know maybe we haven't talked a lot, Lord, but I promise I think I could do it. I won't sin again if you will just get me to the bathroom. We get these places, there's this pain with waiting, and we all experience this in some way, form, or fashion. Now, Jairus, of course, is here in a very serious way. He is stuck, and he's in the pain of waiting in a very serious situation. And while he's waiting, Mark chapter 5, verse 35, it says, while he was still speaking there, came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Get the worst news. Imagine what it would be like to be in his shoes. Imagine what it would be like to watch somebody like Jesus heals this woman in verse 34, says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed. Says this to this woman while his daughter dies. And he's stuck. And he's just sitting there and he's hearing this, the worst news you can get this side of heaven. Hurting in the waiting as he's waiting for Jesus. Whenever we were trying for our third kid, my wife had her first miscarriage. And so interesting hurt. It's an interesting kind of pain. So she gets that news, and we're praying together. We're hurting because we obviously need so much anticipation and excitement to welcome a new baby. And it's not going to happen. And I just remember praying to God, and like together we were going, God, I know there's brokenness in this world. I know like death happens not because like you want this to happen, but because the world's so shattered, it's not the way you created it to be. But Jesus, I just pray that we don't have to deal with this again. I don't want to have to deal with seeing my wife hurt like that. I don't want to have to deal with the pain that I'm even feeling right now. I don't want to have to deal with this again. I would rather just not have another pregnancy if this is going to happen. But God, would you please give us a baby, and would you please not let this happen again? Well, she gets pregnant again, and fairly early, there's some complications, and we go to the doctor. She gets all the tests run. She gets all of the hormonal levels checked like doctors do. And says, we'll get back to you in a couple of days. A couple of days later, I'm driving to the gym, and Carrie tells me, we lost the baby. And that's the only thing she could say. I turn around, and I go to our house, and my wife is crumbled on the floor, bawling. I've never seen her this way. And I just sat there with her, holding her together. We were crying together, just hurting. Asking all the questions that you'd be asking God, like it's such a tension, man. Like, God, you're there, but are you? Jesus, like, you're going to come through for us, but will you? God, I asked you, and you're going to answer. You're going to take care, but I'm not so sure. And we were there just holding each other, hurting and waiting for God. What do you do when you find yourself just holding on by a thread of faith in your life? What do you do when you're barely holding on? Man, last service, guys, this week, I've talked with people that their parents are struggling in their marriage. I've talked to people that let me know that someone last week that was involved here at the Way, she lost her life. Her brother and friends were at the 6 o'clock service just a little bit ago. They were here. I've talked to people that are struggling with addiction and tired of it, and they want to fight it. I've talked with a lot of people just this week, and that's just me. Like, I know the stuff in the room, and I know there's sometimes that we're just like barely hanging on by a thread. Last week during kickoff week, I sent somebody that I care a lot about, said, are you coming to kickoff Sunday? And I felt like the Lord had pressed on me to reach out to this individual as he was struggling with some depression, and said, no, sir. And I said, why not, man? Like, why not? Said, I just don't think the whole Christian church thing is for me anymore. And went on to say that Jesus reaches his hand out, and I try to take it, but I feel like he just lets go sometimes. I don't feel like I've been hearing his voice either. I responded and said that the sun is shining even when the storm clouds are blocking it. Jesus is there, and Jesus loves you. Tonight, I felt like out of all the people I know, you're the one that Jesus wanted me to reach out to specifically. And I said, I love you, man. He said, I love you too, Travis. I just can't do this Christian thing anymore. I'm sorry. I sent him 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17 and 18 that Braden read for you guys a few moments ago, and I just reminded this individual, I saw you be saved by Jesus, bro. You may be done with Jesus at the moment, but Jesus isn't done with you. And then I challenged this individual to listen to the song Maverick by Maverick City, Promises, that really got me through one of the toughest seasons I've ever been through in my life. So listen to that song, and then I sent him another message a couple days later just saying, I'm praying for you. Remember, Jesus died on the cross because he loves you. John 3:16, Jesus loves you, man. And I just ended with 2 words, hold on. And that's what I would say to all of us when we are in the moments. And I know this is heavy. But there's times that, man, we've got 2 words, hold on. What do you do when you're barely hanging on by a thread? You stay and you keep holding on. And then I would say, I remind myself, Jesus hung on the cross for me. I can hold on to my faith in him now. And he didn't die for you and for me to leave us now. And I believe he's going to come through, and I know it's so difficult to keep holding on, to keep waiting for God to come through. But in that difficulty, in that wrestling, like, man, I challenge you, hey, wrestle with God, but just stay. And one pastor said it this way: the only thing harder than waiting on God is wishing you had. The only thing that's harder than waiting on God is wishing that, man, that you would have stayed and wishing that you had. And man, it's so true. That sentence is so true, because we run to a lot of other things and it does not help us. It does not make us better. And then as you're holding on, there's always going to be voices that are telling you to walk away. Whether that's the voice internally inside your own mind that's just saying, man, like, are you sure you want to keep on holding on? Are you sure it's worth it? Or sometimes it's just even friends or family or just the culture around us. You know, we're just flipping. We see the TikTok video of someone challenging faith, and we're like, yeah, maybe it's not real. Maybe I shouldn't hold on. And we have all of these voices and more that would be challenging us to, hey, just walk away. There's always going to be voices challenging us to walk away. It's no different for Jairus. Jairus has someone come up to him in verse 35 and says, hey, would you just walk away? Leave Jesus alone. And then in verse 40, Jesus says, no, I'm not done here. And he says, keep holding on. And then in verse 40, Jesus enters the house, and it says, and they laugh at him. And he says he puts them all outside. Like, there are people that found Jairus' faith in Jesus to be laughable. Whose voice will you listen to? He stayed next to Jesus, even when he didn't understand. Will you stay next to Jesus, even when you don't understand? Will you listen to God? Will we listen to the voice of Jesus that says to keep holding on? And the tension, right, is that we feel like, man, I've got so little faith to give. Like, that's what we sense in the moment. We feel like I've got so little faith to give. And here's where it gets really good for us. The next point is a little faith can do big things. A very famous verse in Scripture, Matthew 17, verse 20, Jesus speaking says, for truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, like the grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Man, what is he saying? Well, just for us to understand how crazy his statement is, here's a picture of someone holding a mustard seed between their fingers. So that's the size of a mustard seed. So what is he trying to say? Like, well, how can something so small do something so big? In Jesus' point, they can do something so big as to move a literal mountain. Like, something so small can do something so big. Why? Because it's not how much faith you have. It's who that faith is in. It's not how big your faith is. It's how big your God is and the place that we put our faith. That's why God can do big things. A mustard seed-sized faith can lead to a miracle. And do we believe that? Do we believe that, man, it can lead to a miracle? Some of us, we hear this like, we're like, man, okay, mustard seed, so I just need to like muster up my faith. See what I did there because it's a mustard seed? And it's like, no. That's not Jesus' point. This is not spiritual self-help. Jesus is saying, actually, the point is the opposite. The point is that, man, as little as you think you have to offer, I'm a really big and able God. And this is what he's trying to get us to see. Look at verse 36. For him, Jesus turns to Jairus and says, do not fear, only believe. 5 words. In English, he gives him 5 words. Sometimes God only gives us a sentence and we just have to hold on to it with everything that we've got. And this one sentence, it's enough for him. In this passage, it ends in a physical miracle. And I know, man, sometimes people are like, do you really believe like that miracles happen? Like, do you believe in the miraculous? Is this something that we actually are going to talk about here? Guys, I just want to tell you, like, I've witnessed praying over somebody with rare form of cancer that was supposed to take her out, prayed over her, went to the doctor, came back, doctor says, can't believe it, cancer's gone. And people go, oh, medical anomaly. I'm going, no, big God. And I've seen this happen multiple times. I've seen, you want to talk about just a spiritual miraculous thing, a little boy that was demon-possessed, won't tell all the backstory, but prayed over him, me and two other people, and I watched the demon leave this little boy, and there's no way that he could act it out. It was real, and it was in the moment God was delivering this child from demon possession. I watched it happen with my own eyes. Crazy. In the middle of the day at 1 p.m., I was like, this is wild. I saw God do that. I've seen God in spiritual ways free people that were hopeless, and they can tell you that they've now found hope in Jesus. I've seen people that I thought would never come to know God, and they get saved and they get baptized. It's crazy watching things that God can do start to happen. Like, do you believe that God can actually do it? Do I really believe? I'll get specific on one example. Just this last year, a friend of mine, Clayton Walker, he's a pastor here in town. He was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And the doctor, whenever he went there, he's a young guy, has young kids. And the doctor told him, for this to turn out in your favor, and I quote, we need a miracle. And so Clayton took that, and that became the banner prayer. And he was praying like, okay, let's pray for a miracle. Then the doctor said it. And so, man, we prayed over him individually. He had this gathering of like 3,000 people that came together saying, God, I believe that you can do it. Would you give him the miracle? And that was months and months ago. And then this summer, he goes on live on his socials, and he says, as of right now, the doctor just gave me the news that there is no active disease in my body. Powerful. God delivered him. Do you believe that God can do it? Do you believe that God can actually do the miraculous? Do I really believe that? And of course, the questions that we have is, but what if he doesn't? Or more specifically, what if he hasn't? I'll give you another story. Here's a picture of my wife's cousin, Chip. He was diagnosed with the exact same cancer at the exact same stage as Clayton at the exact same season of time. And as he went through chemo and he was fighting cancer, he met and talked to me for about 25 minutes at this family gathering as he was battling. And he said, I was really frustrated with God. Had a lot of questions, all the questions like, God, why would you? Because he's a very strong believer, teaching his kids the way of Jesus, trying to be the man of God that God's called him to be. He's like, God, why? Like, why me? Like, why does this have to happen to me? And he was in the middle of frustration. He said God gave him one sentence. It was 3 words. He said, all I've heard extremely clearly from God is one thing. And God just spoke to me in the middle of my frustration, depend on me. And he said, and that's what I've been doing. That's what's gotten me through. And he held on to Jesus in faith till his dying breath, which was also this last summer. Now, here's my question. Did God fail Chip? And the reason why that's a heavy question is because the real question we would be asking internally right now is, did God fail me? Or will God fail me? And we start to think about our lives, like, did God fail in the divorce of my parents as I was crying out to him? Did God fail in the midst of the abuse that I went through? Did God fail in the middle of the depression that I suffered with? Did God fail when the relationship did not end up repaired? Did he fail? Chip held on to his faith, and he would say, God did not fail. No, God didn't fail. Not if the resurrection of Jesus is real. And not if we're going to be with him in heaven forever. And not if one day this brokenness that all of us are touched by and experience is wiped away and it's done with. Then we get to be with God forever in heaven. Not if all of that is true. See, Chip got his miracle, was just on the other side. And what's true for you and me is sometimes Jesus is going to say, no, you just depend on me. Holding on to the fact that every Christian, every believer in Jesus does end up getting their miracle. I love what Revelation chapter 21 verse 4 says. It says Jesus will wipe every tear from their eyes. That, man, God is close. He's closely connected with our pain, and he will wipe them away, the tears that have fallen from our eyes. And says, death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. He won't fail you, and he's with you. And his grace, it's here now, and it's reaching towards you, which brings us to the last and final point this evening. His grace breaks through the barrier. Now, this girl, of course, does get a physical miracle on this earth. And we see in verse 41, so Jesus puts out everybody from the room except for just a few people. And it says, taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And he takes her by the hand. Now, everybody would have saw this girl as a lost cause. Jesus, give up, man. It's a done deal. Sometimes we feel like we're a lost cause. Jesus, you might as well give up. There's no such thing as a lost cause for Jesus. He enters into lost causes and he changed the outcome. This is what he does. This is what you saw with people getting baptized and Braden sharing his testimony. Like, man, he enters into what was dead and brings it to life. And it says that he touches her. He takes her by the hand. It's significant that Jesus takes this little girl by the hand. How do we know that? Well, in Numbers chapter 19, verse 11, there were some laws that people followed to just follow cleanliness. And one of the laws was that if you touch a dead body, you are considered unclean. It says, whoever touches the dead body of any person shall be unclean 7 days. You could say that they were dead serious about this verse. You get it because it's a dead body. That's some killer truth. I'm just saying. I know that sometimes the dad jokes can be overkill here. I'm out. I'm dead right now. All right, now I'm actually out. But there's this barrier that Jesus, he reaches over, like, and he, by the way, in Scripture, he doesn't always touch somebody to heal them. He has spoken just the word, and by his command, people are healed. Why does he reach out and grab this girl's hand? He's showing, hey, I'm going to break through whatever barrier is there to reach you. Like Jesus is willing to break through whatever barrier has been between you and him. And he reaches out, and he's reaching out to take your hand. And he's saying, listen, as he said, Talitha Kumi, rise up. I'm telling you, like, you don't have to stay here anymore. I'm willing to reach across the barrier, and I'm reaching out to you. Would you grab my hand? I will rise you up out of whatever it is that you need to rise out of. The question is, what is it in your life? Where in your life is Jesus saying this powerful word, arise? Maybe it's from the addiction you've struggled with. Maybe it's from, man, just the sin that you've been stuck in. Whatever it is that has robbed you of the life that God has for you. He's saying, will you grab my hand? Will you arise? And in his grace, he is breaking through all of the barrier that would be there. I love what Ephesians chapter 2 says, verse 1 and then verse 4 and 5. It says, you were dead in the trespasses and sin, but God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, he made us alive together with Christ. By grace, you have been saved. And Jesus took on our death and he won. And Jesus reached out his hand to me, breaking through every barrier of sexual sin and brokenness. And me telling God, I told God out loud, say, God, I hate you. I want nothing to do with you. And he said, that's fine. I'll break through that barrier as well. Jesus, I'm untouchable. That's fine. I'll break through that barrier as well. And I don't know where I would be if it wasn't for Jesus, but I can have some guesses. Probably hitting the bars and going to clubs on the weekends. Probably being unfaithful in relationships because that was the road that I was on. Most likely based on the road I was on and already stepped into in some ways, I would be an addict in several different ways. Most likely alcohol would own my life though. There's a lot of things that Jesus reached down and he said, rise up. And whenever he said, arise, I did. Because that's how powerful he is. And he's reaching out his hand to every single person right now. Like his grace is reaching out to you. It's not an accident that we're here. Like God is reaching out to you right now. And he's saying, hey, would you rise up? And man, he will show that he is the victorious conqueror over sin and death. And he rose from the grave and he gives us new life, and we can experience that and we can walk in that. There's no such thing as too far gone, too far away, too messed up, or too difficult for Jesus. And there's no such thing as no one is unsavable for God, man. And I believe he's reaching out. He's reaching out to us. Maybe right now you are in the midst of pain. His grace is reaching out to you. Maybe the sermon's for another time in your life where you're going to need to remember that his grace is reaching out to you. For all of us, will we, like Jairus, humble ourselves and cry out to Jesus? Will we keep holding on in the hurt? And when we feel like we have little to give, man, hey, remember that a little faith can do big things because we serve a mighty God. Remember that he won't fail you, but he meets us right in the midst of the pain, and he says, depend on me. And his resurrection guarantees that your story will end in life if you are a follower of Christ. And this is good news, man. Let's pray, God. Jesus, I just pray that your grace breaks through the barrier. Any barrier up in the room, that your grace would break through. God, I pray that your compassionate kindness would meet somebody who's wounded here, that's hurting. God, for someone that's in the waiting room, God, sustain them with your powerful strength, God. Meet them. God, I pray that we would all stay as we wrestle at times in our life. And Jesus, I thank you that your grace gets the final word. Speak to us, God. Let's stand and worship.